How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion coming our way today. We're going to talk about 5 unspoken expectations that our correctional officers may have with our frontline supervisors. Now, granted, I think it's a great dialogue because we do have a lot of people that are becoming supervisors very young, and it could be because we're understaffed, so we're moving up people pretty quick, or just the mass exodus. People are leaving this profession. So, this video here is an effort to kind of let our new supervisors know that these are some of the expectations, some of the responsibilities even that you need to carry with you when you decide to cross into that supervisory role. Remember, guys, you're not doing this for a perk. You're doing this because you have to be willing to pick up that level of responsibility. So today we're going to discuss 5 unspoken expectations that the correctional officers, your frontline people, are going to expect you to carry out. Now, guys, don't forget, I got books on the market, so please check them out. I got books from everything from manipulation to correctional leadership, supervisory for rookies, all that stuff. I have books on Amazon, and I also have books published through Blue 360 Media. I also have another book coming out for rookies as well. So if you guys get a chance, check out the links to them in the description. Okay, so the first thing I got here is strategic presence, and we're talking about being supportive and not overbearing. This is actually something that took me a second to learn when I became a sergeant, because remember, guys, when you become a sergeant, so again, you're crossing into that initial step of frontline supervision. Now you have people that are directly under you. You have to be prepared to start delegating, which means that you're going to be kind of taking a step back on some of the hands-on approach, and you are going to delegate. Now, with that said, I learned pretty quickly that when I delegate, I may delegate what the job is, but I make sure that I also delegate the authority to complete the job. So I delegate to some level empowerment to the staff. And this is great because that introduced me to finding ways to automate the process. So when I crossed into prison management later on, you guys, you're going to be covering so many areas of responsibility that you can't sit there and micromanage everything. So you have to learn to automate the process. So with that said, it's definitely something as an initial frontline supervisor you work on. It's like, I'm going to delegate. I'm going to make sure that my staff have the authority to complete the how behind the work. And then basically, if they need anything, I'm here. Don't get me wrong, but I got to feel comfortable in giving that work out. And I got to make sure that my staff feel empowered. And I have to start trying to get these processes automated. Now, why does this matter? So a supervisor, what does this mean? Officers expect their supervisors to be present, but not in a way that interferes with their ability to do the job effectively. Supervisors should strike a balance between being available and then allowing officers the space to operate with confidence and autonomy. This to me matters a lot because I'm not a big fan, as I said, of micromanagement. When you automate the process, what you're doing is you're allowing for momentum, positive momentum to take place. And positive momentum will not take place through someone who decides to micromanage and stop efforts. And I also believe the front line want that positive momentum. I believe that. I believe they want empowerment so they can move forward, make decisions that they need to make in real time. Be innovative if need be, because that's another thing. Micromanagement kills innovation. But again, just to kind of keep that momentum going. But in the background, you're supportive. If they have any concerns, you're there. If there's something that's not within their authority to solve, you're there. But the thing is, you're not overbearing them with your presence, and you're allowing them to take ownership of the work being done. And this is great too, because this builds investment. This builds on their confidence. So again, why does this matter? A supervisor who's too hands-off may be seen as disconnected or indifferent. That's why there's that fine balance. Strategic presence. I love that. There's that fine balance. You're there to show support, but I'm not there to do the job for you. While one who's micromanaging can create resentment and hinder decision-making, officers want a leader who steps in when necessary, but trusts them to handle their responsibilities. So how does this look like? Right. So how does this look in practice? So as a supervisor, you're going to want to be walking the facility regularly to observe and not control. To observe, see what's going on, but not in an effort to control, just in an effort to observe. Offering guidance when an officer is uncertain, but not dictating every action. I mean, I love it. Me and Russ discussed in the past where you officer has a problem, and if they do come up to you, you kind of get them to try to solve the problem themselves by asking them the right questions. So you build up their critical thinking. It's good to be walking around so you can read the team's emotional state and adjusting involvement accordingly. Knowing when to intervene and when to let officers handle situations on their own, and setting the tone for the shift. If the supervisor only appears when there's an issue, officers associate their presence with negativity instead of support. Got a quote here. A supervisor's presence should bring stability, not stress. I like that. That's this strategic presence. That's the supportive side. I'm going to read that one more time because that's powerful to me. A supervisor's presence should bring stability, not stress. If officers only see their supervisor when something is wrong, they begin to associate their presence with negativity rather than support. Strategic supervisors build rapport by being visible in everyday operations, not just when discipline is needed. I wanted to add that because I believe that's 100% accurate. I believe that if you are only showing yourself when people are not doing what they're supposed to do, then your presence does get connected to negativity. So therefore, when you're on the scene, people don't want to see you. You make them feel weird. You make them feel uncomfortable. So with that said, that's where the support comes in. You have to balance it out. This way, you're not always connected as a supervisor to the negative. Okay. Let's get the next one. Advocacy behind closed doors. How important is that? So when you're that frontline supervisor, you got to speak languages, man. You got to speak the wants of management coming down, and you got to speak the needs of frontline, and you got to be there in the middle. And I think the language of translation there is speaking buy-in. Can you get management to buy into the concerns that frontline may have? Or if management's trying to push something down, can you get the frontline to buy in? But the big thing here is that frontline wants to see that you have a voice for them. So I think that when they start to trust you and they start to see that you do speak for them, it's no longer about the outcome for them, because sometimes they also know the outcome is not in your control, but your effort is. So they start to judge you based on effort and not outcome. So what does this mean? So supervisors are often the only link between frontline staff and upper management. Officers may not see everything that happens in administrative meetings, but they expect their supervisors to fight for their needs, especially when policies affect safety, workload, or fairness. Now think about that as a supervisor, especially when policies affect safety, workload, or fairness. So why does this matter? So if officers feel that their concerns are ignored, well, their morale is going to drop and distrust grows. So a good supervisor will communicate officers' concerns and push back on policies that don't align with operational realities, even if they can't always change the outcome. And sometimes the pushback is a healthy pushback. I think sometimes management needs to be open to hear that pushback. But again, you got to have trust at that table. Because if you don't have trust, then the pushback that the frontline supervisor is giving may turn out to be, from the perspective of management, some form of judgment, where it's not. It's the frontline speaking for his people. So as management, you have to allow that frontline supervisor to speak for their people. With that said, when you have trust allows for conflict, because it allows for us to discuss ideas in effort to make it better. So a frontline supervisor, even if they don't get the outcome they want, they still have to continue to voice their concerns. Again, this is not about the outcome, but the effort. So with that said, I mean, I wish I could speak on management always accepting it, but definitely you as a frontline supervisor, you always have to provide it. You cannot give up. Be persistent with it. And if it doesn't go your way, at least you knew or at least you know that you did what you needed to do, because it's not just for the front line themselves, but also for you as a good leader. Are you doing enough? And your attempts at that table with management to advocate for their concerns is probably one of the hardest things you have to do. But regardless of the outcome, when you know you're doing it, it feels good. You know you're doing what needs to be done regardless of the outcome. So again, you got to make the effort, because trust and believe that effort does matter. Even if the front line doesn't always see it, it matters to you too, as well, to know that you're doing what you can. It's just that the situation may not be in your control. But with that said, I can control my reaction to it, and I can control my effort towards it. So how does this look in practice? So speaking up when policies negatively impact staff, safety, or efficiency. Now, guys, remember, I don't want you focusing on the outcome here. I want you focusing on the effort, because even if there's people here that say, well, management's not going to listen, maybe they won't. I don't know. But the point is, I could definitely tell you they won't listen if you're not speaking up. So you still have to make the effort regardless of the outcome. And I know that could be extremely exhaustive. I get it. It could take a toll on you. But the point is, that's your job. Because the moment you give in and the moment you give up and decide that you're not going to speak is the moment that you're no longer advocating, and your staff's going to feel that. Trust me. I get, to be honest with you, as a supervisor, you can never be disenfranchised, because your job is to do what you can to translate that buy-in. And that's what makes being a supervisor extremely hard, especially during these times. So again, keeping officers informed about changes and explaining why they're happening. I mean, that's another good thing too, guys. When you're passing the message back and forth, why is very important, because that's what you have to lean on to sell your arguments both ways for the buy-in. You know, this is why my staff need this, and on the other side, this is why management needs this. That why matters because the why is where the buy-in is. So you need to exhaust that why, because in the end, you need people to believe in the message that you are providing them. So again, taking concerns up the chain, even if they know upper management may not listen. We just talked about that. And letting officers know when they've advocated for them so they don't assume inaction. I think that last part, letting officers know when they've advocated for them so they don't assume inaction, again, as a supervisor, I think maybe at first you may have to somehow let staff know what you're speaking on their behalf so they can understand that you're making the effort. But then eventually, to be honest with you, they start trusting in the effort more than the outcome. Because remember, if I don't know you as a supervisor just yet, the outcome may be important to me. And if you're not producing, I may judge you based on that. But with that said, when I start seeing that you're providing the effort, but the outcome's more out of your control, then it's more about the effort. So I know that when you go to the table, regardless of what the outcome is, that you're giving it a good effort. That's the key. And that comes when there's that trust. So a quote I got here is, even if a supervisor can't change a policy, they should still communicate their efforts while fostering understanding. A simple, I brought up our concerns, and while the decision stands, here's why it's being implemented and how we can make it work, helps officers feel heard while also creating buy-in. I talked about buy-in. Silence, on the other hand, is often mistaken for indifference. Okay, so that's another thing. And guys, that's always going to be that battle, the back and forth. So prepare for that level of responsibility. Okay, so number 3 is crisis leadership that prioritizes staff over optics. So what does that mean? So supervisors must be able to make decisions based on what's best for staff and facility safety, not just how it will look to administration or the public. And that's something that is worth repeating, especially if you're in prison management and you're watching this video. Supervisors must be able to make decisions based on what's best for staff and facility safety, not just how it will look to administration or the public. Officers need to trust that their supervisors will make the right call in a crisis and not hesitate out of fear of scrutiny or judgment. And why does this matter? So in moments of crisis, whether it's a violent incident, a major rule violation, or an emergency lockdown, Officers rely on their supervisors to be decisive and prioritize their well-being. Supervisors who delay action or prioritize optics over staff safety quickly lose credibility. So how does this practice look? Making quick, clear decisions in high-pressure situations. We definitely expect that from our supervisors. Supporting officers who follow procedures even when incidents bring a lot of scrutiny. So you're standing up for your officers, you're telling management why this decision was made and how you stand by those decisions, regardless of how it looks. I'm going to stand by the decision that the officer made because that decision was made in real time based on whatever information that officer had. And therefore, I supported the decision they made because, again, the decision that they make looks a lot different when you got all the information, the next day. Addressing problems directly instead of avoiding them for fear of administrative pushback, and demonstrating composure under stress to reassure the team. And that's important too. The quote I have here is: a good supervisor isn't afraid to take ownership of a tough call. If an inmate incident escalates, officers expect their supervisors to act decisively, even if that decision comes with scrutiny later. The worst thing a leader can do in a crisis is freeze or hesitate or defer that responsibility. We need to make sure that, people in those initial supervisory positions do have confidence in their decision making. Because remember, even if it's not the perfect decision, we're trusting the supervisors to give us a decision, at least to slow things down. Because again, we've discussed this before. Corrections is so complex and so fluid. The problems are they pile up if you don't act. So we expect supervisors to lean into the conflict, lean into the concerns, lean into the complexity, and then make a decision, put it out there, and hopefully make an effort to slow it down, whatever the concern is. And again, it's something that we expect, and we want our supervisors to have confidence in that. But granted, even when we're advocating for our staff who make decisions, it's good for us to also understand why they made that decision, because at the end of the day, if there is a concern or if there is scrutiny, you have to you may have to speak on their behalf, and you're going to have to let management know from their perspective. And usually how this translates is when management sees it, they may see it the day after. So therefore the whole puzzle's there, the picture's there. So management sees things at a higher level, at a complete picture, where your officer didn't. Your officer's trying to figure it out in the moment, trying to put the pieces together. So technically the picture that management sees actually started from this officer starting to build the puzzle without actually knowing what that picture is going to be. That's the unique thing. So you have to be able to talk to your officer and translate what that officer was trying to build at that moment. Regardless of the outcome, I need to know what that officer's intent was. That matters. Good intent matters in this profession, and we have to be able to translate that good intent even if there's a bad outcome. That's our job as supervisors. Our job as supervisors is, hey, that was a good intent. I get it, but it just didn't work out. But I'm going to make sure that management knows what your intent was, because right now all they see is this. They're not going to know what your intent is. So my job is to get right into that office and say, hey, I know this doesn't look good on paper, but let me go ahead and translate what this officer was trying to do, and let me do the best I can to go ahead and show support to my officer. And it's times like that, it's not going to be times to try to separate, because sometimes that can happen. Management could say, you know what, I'm going to hold you both responsible. Okay, then I guess you're going to have to hold us both responsible, because I believe in my officer's intent, and that doesn't change because you're going to smack a little discipline on me. Some people may decide to advocate, and the moment management comes to smack a little discipline, they put their hands up and they give up in advocating. And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. Okay, if you're going to give my officer a charge, and I know that was based on good intent, and I truly understand where they're coming from, then I'm going to go ahead and have to take the charge with them. Because I don't want you to think that, me advocating for them was conditional. I advocated for them because it was the right thing. So if you decide to give them a charge, I'm going to stand next to them with that decision. And if they decide to appeal, I will be their witness on why this decision was made. I mean, that's what you got to do as a frontline supervisor. Most of the time as frontline supervisors, you are going to be defending the intent, because the intent is not so easily seen. Let's be honest. And you don't want people that have more information looking at it from an office all the way in the distance, translating that intent. You need to get up there immediately and put that intent out there. I spoke to my officer. This is why they did what they did. So before you start looking at everything with that complete picture, let me show you how it looked like from my officer's perspective. All right, let's get the next one. Number 4, fair and thoughtful enforcement of policy. So what does that mean? Well, while rules and policies exist for a reason, officers expect supervisors to use judgment rather than blindly enforcing regulations without considering context. And I always talk about context. That's why when we have discussions, we don't just provide 5 tips. We provide context. We provide meaning. So then you can apply that to the lesson. Officers also expect their supervisors to admit when they've made a mistake rather than hiding behind policy. Why does this matter? If policies are enforced inconsistently or unfairly, trust in leadership erodes. Officers who feel like policies are applied selectively or that supervisors never hold themselves accountable become disengaged and resentful. Consistency and fairness are key. And how does this look like in practice? Addressing infractions appropriately based on intent, and we just talked about that, and impact, not just technical violations. Acknowledging, and you know what, that's extremely powerful. So addressing infractions appropriately based on intent and impact, not just technical violations. Because can I tell you something, guys? There's a lot of learning that happens through mistakes and failures. And sometimes you get departments that are quick to write people up so they can separate themselves from the failure when you could actually have a very good, strong, teachable moment. So with that said, instead of being quick to write the person up, instead of being quick to discipline, can this be turned into a teachable moment? What was the outcome of what happened? Was it so disastrous, okay, that we have to do something because of liability's sake? Do we have to put this on paper? Or was it something that it was a mistake, but we were able to adjust, we were able to fix, and it wasn't an integrity issue from the officer, it's just more of a competency concern. So could we make this in a teachable moment? And I do think that matters. I think knowing what the officer's intent is, see if it was a good intent just put into a bad situation, or if the situation were we able to control it. No harm, no foul. Okay, let's make this a teachable moment, because I have to still be able to balance what? I got to be able to balance the officer's confidence in making a mistake. I don't want people to be so afraid of making a mistake that they wind up not making decisions. Granted, experience, will help you make more strategic mistakes to some extent. But with that said, we need to balance that process. So I love that. I love the fact that it says addressing infraction appropriately based on intent and impact, not just technical violations. Acknowledging when a mistake was made instead of shifting blame. Okay, so this is more of a supervisory role here too, but I'm not perfect as a supervisor. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm also aware that my frontline people shouldn't be seeing me as perfect anyway. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to go to them when I need help. It is what it is. So I do want accountability, which means that if I make a mistake, I'm going to step up, take onus of it, and then hopefully I expect them to do the same. And that's such a great example, because if I'm doing it, then I expect you to do it. And also if I'm not coming after you every time you make a mistake, then I expect you to be honest with me when you do make a mistake. So again, that shifting blame is usually comes with those supervisors that fear judgment or just want to impress and want to be seen as these gods. When at the end of the day, the leadership that I truly respected were leaders that were more vulnerable. And when I mean vulnerable, I don't mean people that were so vulnerable they couldn't do the job, but vulnerable enough to show that they're human, that I'm giving you the best I can give of you. I could still be vulnerable and be confident in my vulnerability. It's not vulnerability that makes you stop moving forward, but rather vulnerability that is confident vulnerability. It takes courage to admit vulnerability, but it's also a level to bring your people together and let them know that it's not about perfection here. It's not about perfection. Explaining policy decisions so officers understand the reasoning behind them. That's key, and we talked about that. If there's a decision on policy, if there's a decision on procedure, you need to really get that why from management, because I need to lean on that why to translate buy-in, because or investment. If I don't give them a why and I just tell them to follow this shit blindly, there's nothing for them to connect to. There's no investment. So that why, again, matters. It helps me translate buy-in, helps me translate connection to the work. and then holding everyone, including themselves, accountable to the same standard. And that's what we just talked about. So there's a quote here: officers don't expect perfection. There it is. But they do expect fairness. A supervisor who disciplines officers harshly but refuses to admit their own mistakes creates resentment. That's powerful. A supervisor who disciplines officers harshly but refuses to admit their own mistake creates resentment. When policies are enforced selectively, trust erodes. Supervisors who lead by example and hold themselves accountable build credibility. And the last thing I got, guys, and this is important, especially in today's times, leadership that recognizes burnout, morale concerns, disenfranchisement. So what does this mean? Corrections is an emotionally and physically exhausting job, so officers may not always verbalize when they're struggling, but they expect their supervisors to recognize signs of burnout and take steps to manage morale before it reaches a breaking point. Now, why does that matter? Because unchecked burnout leads to poor performance, increased mistakes, and higher turnover. So a good supervisor doesn't just push their team harder. They understand that a drained workforce is a dangerous one and take steps to support their officers. I want to mention something here, and I think that was unique. I remember a scenario where and to keep this kind of quick, I saw an inmate that was very entitled, kind of running around a little bit when they weren't supposed to. And then I saw a bunch of officers not stepping up and addressing the inmate. And on the surface, the first thing you would see is officers not wanting to do their job. But again, as a supervisor, if you step back and you see the context, it wasn't the fact that the officers didn't want to do their job. They were disenfranchised. They just were exhausted because when they were doing their job, they didn't feel that they were supported. So at that point, it was like this entitled inmates versus disenfranchised staff, which is a mixture you do not want. But with that said, it takes time for now the supervisor to step back and say, hey, wait a second. Before I start, going after my staff, is there something I'm doing wrong? Or is there something I can do better? I think that takes tremendous insight from a supervisor before they go into that impulsive reaction as I'm going to come after staff for not doing their job. I think it's always good to see if there's a deeper meaning behind the why of what's not being done that needs to be done. And I think that matters. So the first thing you do is reflect on yourself. Is there something I can do more? And what's good about that too is this way, if there is an effort you have to take that could lean towards discipline or whatever, at least you get rid of that exhaustive measure from looking inwards and saying, have I done enough? Because I know that happens as a frontline supervisor. If you're a really good leader and you get to that point where you have to write somebody, I know sometimes there are some people that could feel guilt because they're always wondering, could I have done more? Did I fail this individual? And at the end of the day, it's like you need to lean on your efforts. So it's like, hey, at this point here, I got to do something. One, because the team's expecting it. And two, it's creating tremendous liability. So the first thing is as a supervisor, I look inwards. I look at myself. Is there anything I could do more? And if it's a competency issue, then I'm going to do what I can to train the individual. If it's a burnout issue, I'm going to try to figure out, what I could do to try to alleviate some of that stress or that anxiety if possible. Or if I can't, then maybe roll up my sleeves and not do the work for them, but kind of do the work with them. So we're all on the same page. So we're all sharing the same burden. And if it's an integrity issue, I'm not doing much for that. You're shit out of luck with me on that one. And so how does this look in practice? So recognizing when officers are overworked and making adjustments when possible, acknowledging difficult days instead of expecting staff to just deal with it. Right? I mean, no, the days are difficult now. So you need to acknowledge that and work with staff, and that's where that level of vulnerability comes in. But with that vulnerability, you start to build trust. I mean, I think it's great when you have these tough times, but you're able to look at each other knowing that you're going to get through it. So I may not be able to give you control of the tough times you're going through, but I know that we could do it together. So this way it's not hopeless. I don't want to supervise hopeless people. So if I can't find hope in the situation of something I can't control, then I'll look at us and find hope amongst us. Offering encouragement or appreciation to let officers know their work is valued. Again, that's great. I mean, that's not superficial recognition. That's appreciation. That's literally appreciation for the things that they're doing every day to maintain a safe operations. And I think that's something we need to do more of. And finding ways to ease pressure, whether through better shift distribution or small morale boosting efforts. I know shift distribution may not always be there, but the small morale boosting efforts work. But with that said, before you start to do those initiatives, there's got to be trust between you and your people, or else it becomes superficial. So again, I got a quote here. Supervisors don't have to fix burnout, but they do have to acknowledge it. A simple, I see how much you're doing and I appreciate it, can go a long way. Officers don't expect miracles, but they do expect their hard work to be noticed. So I wrote here, by focusing on these 5 areas: strategic presence, advocacy, crisis leadership, fairness and morale, supervisors can build stronger relationships with their officers and earn their respect. And these are the unspoken expectations that aren't about making the job easier. They're just about making leadership stronger. And that's a great way to end it. So again, those unspoken expectations aren't about making the job easier. They're about making your leadership stronger. Build that connection. As always, guys, the show is Tear Up. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.